The morning they fired me, I watched $11.8 million vanish in real time. Not into some offshore maze or crypto haze. No. It walked, bold as brass, out of Mariner Tower's bank account to a vendor that technically shouldn't exist. And the funniest part? I saw it happen because I was sitting in the wrong room, drinking the worst coffee on earth, while HR waited outside with my termination papers. Through the glass wall of Aurora conference room, I had the perfect angle on accounts payable. 3 monitors glowed, stacked like slot machines in Vegas, reels spinning with dollar signs. The queue blinked, North Coast Strategies LLC. Status, pending review. I held my breath. Then, click. The word changed to released. Gone. 8 figures swallowed whole. No ceremony. No oversight. Just a single line in a system most people never notice. The fluorescents hummed overhead, that tired electric hymn they sing when they've burned too long. And in that flickering light, I saw the green checkmarks cascade down the approval chain: VP Finance Elaine Brooke, CFO Greg Tolson, and finally Victor Halden, CEO. His approval timestamp? 2:13 a.m. No comments. No supporting docs. Just a ghostly signature in the middle of the night. I wasn't supposed to be there. But I'd learned long ago that if you stack 2 office chairs and feel along the windowsill, you'll find a key taped there for the AV cart. The cart has its own uplink. Forgotten, never decommissioned, as invisible as the stains under the break room microwave. From that uplink, you can see things you're not meant to see. That's my specialty. I know the building's underbelly, which badge reader logs every error to a hidden file, which copier jams every Thursday after the cleaning crew touches it, which print server never actually deletes spooled jobs until Friday at 7:03 p.m. You don't need admin rights if you know the quirks. And I know every quirk. My name is Maya Reed, and I'm the kind of woman executives underestimate until it costs them everything. I was about to lose my job for attitude. But as I stood there, memorizing a vendor ID and routing number like scripture, I realized something. This wasn't sloppiness. It was deliberate. Someone created a fake vendor, dressed it up in a passable website and a phone tree with the default robotic voice, and shoved it through the system in the dead of night. And the only fingerprints on it were from the highest floors of Mariner Tower. HR's Jared appeared outside the glass with his manila folder, rehearsing his empathetic smile like a bad actor about to deliver a death scene. He motioned toward the door. 1 minute, I mouthed, sipping burnt coffee thick enough to paint walls. He looked confused, but waited. I slid my badge into my wallet, not his hand. Souvenir. Proof. A weapon. Then I poured myself a second cup of tar, steady as stone, and stared one last time at those glowing monitors as the $11.8 million sank into digital quicksand. That was the moment I made my promise, not to the company, not to Victor, not even to myself. I made it to the building. To the humming fluorescents, the servers that breathed cold, the exit signs that buzzed like a warning. I wouldn't break a single law. But I would break their routines. And by the time I was done, that missing money would drag the right names down with it. And that's how my revenge began, not with anger, but with numbers scrolling across a screen, vanishing into a vendor no one should have trusted. The money left quietly. I didn't. Mariner Tower was built to intimidate. The lobby is marble so polished you can see your regrets in it, the elevator whispers instead of dings, and the executive suite smells faintly of eucalyptus and money. But that's just the postcard view. The real building lives in the shadows, in the humming server closets, the faint buzz of exit signs, the maintenance hallways that smell like lemon cleaner and stale dust. That's where I thrived. While everyone else obsessed over polished conference rooms and corporate logos, I mapped the skeleton beneath the skin. I knew which badge reader sometimes double-logged swipes, which copier stored every print job in a hidden shadow file, which freight elevator emailed load reports to the landlord's compliance portal at midnight sharp. It wasn't espionage. It was survival. I built the vendor onboarding system, the boring scaffolding no one glamorous wanted. I wrote the rules, W-9 required, certificate of insurance uploaded, bank letterhead attached. And because I wrote them, I knew exactly how to bend them. That's why North Coast Strategies stood out. 8 weeks old, no staff, a templated website that looked like it was thrown together between coffee breaks. And yet somehow, in the middle of the night, it cleared my system in 28 minutes. Impossible, unless the system was told to skip its safety nets. Which it had been. By people who thought no one would ever notice. But I noticed everything. The W-9 bore an e-signature certificate. Most people wouldn't care, but I checked the metadata. It wasn't signed from a vendor's network. It was signed from inside Mariner Tower at 2:11 a.m., same moment the building's after-hours HVAC kicked on for the executive suite. The system asked for proof of legitimacy, someone fed it a ghost. My cubicle had been under a flickering ballast, facilities called it pending replacement for 3 years. Everyone hated sitting there. I loved it. It meant I could observe without being observed. From that desk I had taped my secret cheat map of the tower, arrows, notes, times. A scavenger hunt of negligence and shortcuts that everyone else ignored. That map was still in my head when Jared walked me out with my cardboard box. He thought he was escorting me away from the company. What he didn't know was that I was carrying the company's skeleton key between my ears. As the elevator hummed down, I glanced sideways at him. He was holding my termination folder like it was fragile glass, trying not to look guilty. "Is your badge deactivated yet?" he asked, as though the badge were wound. "Guess we'll find out at the turnstile," I said. He smiled, relieved I wasn't dramatic. He didn't realize I was silently chanting numbers under my breath, vendor ID, routing, timestamps, usernames. A litany. A spell. At the lobby, I didn't head straight out. Instead, I paused, eyes sliding across the walls. I saw the ducts, the risers, the utility closets, the badge readers, all the veins that carried Mariner Tower's lifeblood. I could almost hear the building whisper, "I'll help you, if you know where to listen." And I did. I walked out with my box of dead office junk, my succulent clinging to life, and a notebook fat with sticky flags. But I also walked out with something priceless, a trail. A trail leading from a fake company into the heart of the executive suite. The money had vanished. My job had vanished. But my access? My knowledge? My map? Those were still mine. And they were sharper than any weapon. They put me in Caspian for the execution. Of all the glass boxes in Mariner Tower, that one was built to intimidate. No blinds, no shadows, just floor-to-ceiling transparency so everyone walking by could watch you squirm. The table was polished to a mirror, so you could stare at your own nervous hands while they cut you down. Victor Halden sat in the middle, the way a stage actor claims the spotlight. His smile looked friendly until you realized it was carved from marble. Elaine Brooke, VP Finance, angled her chair toward me, papers stacked with surgical neatness. "Maya," she said, voice dipped in sugar. "Your attention to detail has always been impressive. But your attitude is creating disruption." Disruption. That word. As if raising alarms about an $11.8 million ghost transfer was the same as knocking over a stapler. Victor folded his hands, leaning forward just enough to look paternal. "We're moving in a new direction. Today will be your last day." That was it. No build-up, no explanation. Just a guillotine sentence dropped in 3 seconds flat. Elaine slid the slim folder across the table. Separation packet. 2 weeks severance. A non-disparagement clause written in soft corporate language that really meant, we erase you, you erase us. I flipped the first page slowly, letting my eyes skim the paragraphs, but my mind was elsewhere. I was reading the little things, the document ID in the footer, the filing code in the corner, the way Elaine's initials were stamped on every sheet. Tiny details, but details add up. Always. Any questions? Victor asked, already half checked out. He glanced at the clock, probably thinking about his next board call or his steakhouse lunch reservation. I set the papers down. Just one, I said. My voice was calm, maybe too calm. What happens when disruption points at something you'd rather keep quiet? For a flicker, half a heartbeat, his smile faltered. Elaine's eyes narrowed, but she didn't answer. She just closed the folder as though shutting a lid on me. Jared from HR will walk you out, Victor said, his tone final. That was their mistake. They thought this was closure. They thought handing me a box and a pink slip would erase the trail. But trails don't vanish. Not in a building like this. The vendor approval, the 2:13 a.m. timestamp, the HVAC logs humming like a guilty conscience, all of it was still alive, stitched into the fabric of Mariner Tower. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I let them believe they'd won. But as I stood, I looked into that polished table and saw not my reflection, but theirs, brittle, overconfident, blind to the kind of person they'd just unleashed. Victor thought he'd solved a problem. What he'd actually done was cut the leash. No payroll chain. No gag order I couldn't fight. Just me, my notebook, and a memory sharp enough to slice glass. They called it a clean break. I called it the opening move. The box HR let me carry out looked pathetic, one succulent, a handful of pens, a notebook fat with sticky flags. To anyone else, it was junk. To me, it was an arsenal. That night I spread it across my kitchen table like evidence on a detective's board. My apartment smelled faintly of detergent from the laundromat down the block, the hum of the old fridge filling the silence. I flicked on the overhead light, snapped open the notebook, and started sorting. First, the anomaly. North Coast Strategies LLC. 8 weeks old. No employees, no physical address that wasn't a P.O. box in Delaware. Website template ripped from a stock builder. And yet, $11. 8 million wired in a single stroke, rubber stamped by Victor himself at 2:13 a.m. Second, the loopholes. My workflow had guardrails, but they weren't iron bars. They were policies, easy to ignore if someone at the top whispered exception. I wrote in bold marker, exceptions equals fingerprints. Because every time you bypass a control, you leave a scar in the system. Third, the levers. Revenge wasn't going to be emotional, it had to be procedural, traceable, undeniable. I listed them one by one. Whistleblower policy. Buried in the employee handbook, promising direct access to the board's audit committee. Rarely used, but binding. Property management. Our lease required proof of insurance coverage. I knew Victor had let a renewal certificate lapse. A pressure point. Audit trails. Badge logs, HVAC requests, copier queues. Dull as dirt, but impossible to erase without leaving deeper marks. I pinned sticky notes in rows, yellow for evidence, pink for policies, blue for pressure points. My table became a battlefield. The succulent sat in the corner, stubbornly alive despite weeks of office neglect. I took it as a sign. I wasn't here to burn down the building. I was here to survive long enough to flip the power structure on its head. I poured myself a glass of cheap wine, opened my laptop, and began drafting. Not angry rants. Not accusations. Cold, clinical letters. Certified mail language designed to outlast excuses. One to the audit committee chair, marked confidential. One to the property manager, noting a compliance risk on insurance coverage. Each carefully phrased so no one could accuse me of defamation, but every line sharp enough to make an executive bleed. By midnight, my table was a war room. Color-coded cards fanned across the wood, arrows connecting loopholes to names, names to policies. I could almost hear the fluorescent hum of the office above me, as if the building itself was waiting for my next move. Victor thought firing me meant erasing me. But what he didn't know was that he'd just given me time. Time to dig. Time to plan. Time to weaponize the very systems I'd built. The money was gone, but the story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The first lever wasn't dramatic. It was paper. At the cafe's corner table, I drafted a letter so dry it could start a brush fire. To Audit Committee Chair, Board of Directors. Subject, Good Faith Report of Control Bypass resulting in an $11.08 disbursement. No adjectives, no accusations, just a timeline, policy citations, and 3 exhibits. A. Emergency vendor workflow with my initials in the margin. B. W9 e-signature certificate timestamped 2:11 a.m. From a corporate IP. C. Approval chain culminating in Victor Halden at 2:13 a.m. I quoted our handbook, exceptions must be documented within 48 hours, failure triggers independent review. Then I underlined nothing. Underlining is emotion, footnotes are force. I printed it at the copy shop that smells like warm toner and cardboard. The clerk, a guy with a name tag that said Luis, flipped his notary placard toward me with a little flourish. I swore to the truth, signed in blue, watched the stamp bite down, ink and authority married in a rectangle. I slid the packet into a certified mail envelope, green card tucked in like a blade. USPS 70220410000311264931. Tracking numbers are how truth gets shoes. The second lever lived in the building's basement office behind a glass door labeled Property Management. The room always smelled like cold air and binder dust. Gail Mendoza, the property manager, had the calm face of a woman who speaks fluent lease. Quick question, I said, placing another neat packet on her desk. Your records require tenants to maintain current certificates of insurance, general liability and cyber. Our renewal binder shows a 10-day gap starting next week. That would put Suite 17 in default, no? I didn't smile. She didn't either. She opened her compliance portal, eyes scanning. If there's a gap, she said, we issue notice, then late fees, then access limitations. She looked up. Who are you again? Former operations, I said. Still a fan of rules. She photocopied my note and slid it into a red folder marked notices. The quiet thunk was better than applause. Third lever, documentation that breathes. I drafted 3 sworn statements, short, factual, notarized. One about the emergency vendor bypass and the policy clock that never started. One about the after-hours HVAC request for the executive floor that aligned with the W9 signature. One about badge reader B logging microsecond errors during a 2 a.m. swipe. I kept adjectives out and timestamps in. Back at my apartment, I lined the certified receipts on the table like chess pieces. A separate sealed envelope went to the bank's commercial fraud liaison. Not a complaint, a question. Can you confirm whether vendor onboarding metadata is part of standard ACH anomaly review? They love process more than people. Good. Process is on my side. Before sleep, I scheduled an email to whistleblower at the inbox that bypasses management and routes to the board's outside counsel. I attached PDFs, hashed each file, pasted SHA 256 digests into the footer. Overkill? Maybe. But hash values are immune to we never got that and this looks altered. I ended the night at the laundromat, sitting on a humming washer with a notebook on my knees. Under the buzz of fluorescent tubes, I wrote the only sentence in the plan that felt like a prayer: routines hide crimes. Timelines reveal them. Then I added dates: day 2 for postal delivery, day 5 for lease notice, day 7 for audit committee acknowledgement. Compliance has its own heartbeat, you just have to count along. I walked home with warm clothes and colder resolve. No theatrics, no threats, just levers set, clocks ticking, stamps drying. Victor thought he'd exiled me from the building. He forgot I built the routes the building uses to speak. Next, I'd make sure it spoke loudly. The server room was my cathedral. Cold air blasting from vents, cable bundles twisted like vines, the faint whine of machines that never slept. Most people hated stepping inside, it froze their bones, numbed their fingers. I loved it. Silence. There wasn't silence. It was data breathing. I didn't technically have access anymore. But Rena did. She was still in IT, still loyal, still furious at how they'd shoved me out. She met me by the freight elevator, badge clipped low. 5 minutes, she said. If anyone asks, you were never here. We slipped into the icebox. I pulled on gloves, not for fingerprints, but for the chill. My breath fogged as I traced the racks, eyes scanning labels until I found the familiar hum of Print Server 04. That machine was my goldmine. It never deleted spooled jobs until the Friday checksum cycle. And tonight was Wednesday. The file queue still held ghosts, packets printed during the 2 a.m. window when North Coast was born. I scrolled metadata, heart ticking faster. There it was, vendor onboarding docs printed at 2:14 a.m. Victor Halden himself had printed the North Coast packet. I screenshotted the metadata, exported logs to a clean thumb drive. Rena slipped into my palm. No content, just headers, timestamps, user IDs. Innocent looking until you stitched them into a pattern. But patterns were everything. 2 minutes, Rena whispered. Next stop, HVAC logs. I pulled the service console. The system timestamped every after-hours request with precision. Sure enough, 2:11 a.m. Executive Suite override activated for a 2-hour window. Someone wanted cold air while they worked ghosts through the system. Badge reader B corroborated it, one failed swipe, logged at the same second. A desperate entry, maybe Victor himself fumbling at the door. I bundled the evidence. Printer metadata pointing to Victor. HVAC logs matching the W9 signature time. Badge error at the same second. No accusations. Just numbers. And numbers never beg. Rena touched my arm. That's enough. We left as quietly as we came, the freight doors closing behind us. I slipped the thumb drive into a pocket sewn into my jacket lining. My entire career had lived in systems like this, boring, overlooked, humming away in back rooms. Now those same systems were my weapon. Out on the street, the city air felt warmer, almost heavy. I walked fast, thumb brushing the drive in my pocket. The building thought it had expelled me. Instead, it had handed me its pulse, frozen into logs no one upstairs could erase without tearing down the walls themselves. Evidence doesn't shout. It waits. And I was ready to make them listen. The conference room wasn't mine this time. It belonged to outside counsel, neutral territory with glass walls, leather chairs, and bottled water lined like ammunition. The kind of room where reputations go to die. I had spent the week preparing. Letters sent. Notices filed. Evidence sealed. Every lever I'd pulled was now humming quietly in the background. The audit committee had called me in, not as an employee, not even as a former employee, but as a witness. And I intended to play the role perfectly. When I walked in, 3 board members sat along one side of the table. A lawyer in a navy suit took the other end. He nodded but didn't smile. Good. Smiles waste time. Ms. Reed, the chair began. You claim an irregular vendor payment was authorized outside procedure. Please explain. I slid a folder onto the table. Not fat, not messy. Thin, precise. Not a claim, I said. A timeline. Inside were 3 pieces of paper. That was all. The first showed the vendor created and approved in less than 30 minutes, no independent verification. The second, HVAC logs matching the time of the signature. The third, print metadata confirming packets generated at the exact same minute. 3 dots in a straight line. Anyone could connect them. The lawyer leaned forward. And you're sure these records are authentic? I don't deal in guesses, I replied. They're notarized copies. Originals can be pulled from the building's own systems. If they haven't already been overwritten, which in itself would be another violation. The board members shifted uncomfortably. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at each other. That was the flip. In one moment, I wasn't the problem. I was the solution to theirs. One of them asked the inevitable question, and whose approval appears last? I didn't answer with words. I tapped the paper once with my finger. Victor Halden's name sat there in black and white, timestamp glowing like a scar. The silence that followed was heavier than any speech. Even the lawyer's pen froze mid-note. Finally, the chair cleared her throat. We will need to retain independent auditors. Effective immediately, discretionary payments are frozen. That was the pivot I'd planned for. Once auditors step in, executives lose the power to bury skeletons. The process locks down, and the more they squirm, the louder it creaks. I leaned back, calm. That's all I came to show. The rest is your system's job. The lawyer gave me a measured look. You've made yourself a liability to certain people, Ms. Reed. Then I suppose it's lucky I already understand liability clauses, I said. I gathered my folder, still thin, still sharp, and stood. The board members avoided my eyes, which told me everything. They weren't wondering if Victor was guilty. They were calculating how much it would cost to protect themselves when the truth surfaced. The flip wasn't about shouting or accusing. It was about putting the right papers in the right room, letting silence do the cutting. And as I walked out into the hallway, I knew the silence was still working, still slicing. Victor thought he'd erased me. But now his own board was holding a knife, and he was the one sitting under glass. The first ripple hit through property management. Gail Mendoza didn't waste time, she issued a formal notice citing the insurance lapse. It wasn't dramatic, just a stapled packet with a red stamp, default notice. But in the language of leases, that stamp is a gun on the table. If Mariner didn't cure the gap in coverage, the landlord had grounds to restrict access. Victor might command the company, but the building itself could turn him into a guest. The second ripple came from the board. My evidence had done its work. They retained an external audit firm and froze all discretionary spending until the review was complete. That meant every invoice, every payment, every emergency transfer was locked under a microscope. Finance hated it. Vendors hated it. Victor hated it most of all. And the third ripple, my favorite, came from the bank. A compliance officer reached out for clarification. Not friendly, not hostile, just clipped emails asking for receipts tied to the $11.08 payment. Banks don't like mystery. They like paper. And Victor had left nothing but smudges. The effect was immediate. Elaine from finance scrambled, demanding old certificates and drafting memos about oversight improvements. Her tone had changed, from smug dismissal to brittle urgency. The kind of urgency that smells like panic hiding behind bullet points. From my apartment, I tracked the echoes. Copies of certified mail receipts sat in a neat row on my kitchen table. I knew the timelines now: lease cure period, audit deadlines, bank follow-ups. Each was a lock clicking shut, one after the other. Victor was still strutting through the executive suite, but the walls were quietly closing in. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. This wasn't the finish line, it was scaffolding. Pressure points don't topple towers on their own. They make the tower lean, creak, expose its weak joints. My job was to push at the right angle when the weight became unbearable. One night, I parked across from Mariner Tower, watching the lights bleed through its glass skin. Floor by floor, I could guess the moods: accounting still buzzing late, legal glowing dim, executive floor lit like a stage no one wanted to exit. From the street, the tower looked untouchable. But I knew better. I knew where the lease was cracking, where the auditors were digging, where the bank's questions had already begun to sour. Victor had fired me thinking I was an inconvenience. Now his empire was tripping over its own rules, and all I had done was give the first nudge. The locks were in place. The question was simple: how long until he heard them click? The first cracks in my plan didn't come from Victor. They came from the system itself, twisting against me like a building shifting in an earthquake. It began with a phone call. I dialed the whistleblower hotline from my kitchen table, expecting the usual sterile recording. Instead, I got a cheerful HR receptionist. "Human resources, how can I direct your call?" For a second, I thought I'd misdialed. I hadn't. The line that was supposed to bypass management had been rerouted straight back to the department paid to bury problems. My safety valve had become a surveillance trap. Then came the second blow. Rena, my one ally in IT, the only reason I'd pulled logs from the server room, was suspended. Officially, irregular system access. In reality, she had brushed too close to the ghost vendor trail. They hadn't just cut me off. They'd silenced anyone who could have backed me up. The third hit landed in my inbox. Requests for system records returned with a blunt red stamp, access denied. Entire folders were suddenly under legal hold. Metadata I'd counted on was now quarantined, flagged as tainted. The evidence I'd trusted to protect me had been locked inside their vault, controlled by lawyers whose job was to make sure nothing escaped. That night I parked across from Mariner Tower and watched. The executive floor glowed like a stage set, but the performance inside had changed. Guards lingered in the lobby longer than usual. Lights on the server level flickered past midnight. Even the janitorial staff seemed jittery, hurrying through their routines as if afraid to linger. Something inside was tightening, and it wasn't just security protocols, it was the noose around my plan. For the first time, doubt crept in. My whole strategy rested on procedure, policies, contracts, compliance timelines. But Victor was bending procedure like wet wire. He didn't need to erase the truth. He just needed to keep it caged until people forgot. Sitting in my car, I pulled my badge from my wallet. Smooth plastic, no power left. I held it against the steering wheel, half expecting it to glow green one last time. Instead, the tower's badge readers blinked steadily as employees filed out, red and green like a heartbeat I no longer shared. I had believed the building itself was on my side, that its quirks and logs would protect me. Now, for the first time, I wasn't sure. Doors I once slipped through had sealed shut. Allies were falling. The hotline was poisoned. I wasn't just up against Victor anymore. I was up against the machine I thought I had mastered. And machines don't care who built them. The wall became a trap the moment they brought in Lena Cho. Lena was the audit committee chair, the very person the handbook promised would be my shield. I'd imagined her as impartial, professional, maybe even curious. Instead, she walked into the review flanked by two attorneys and greeted Victor with the kind of familiarity you don't learn in a boardroom. Dinner companions. Family friends. Maybe more. In that instant, the process I trusted turned into theater, and I realized I was the unwanted extra. They summoned me for clarification. The room was heavy with staged neutrality, long table, bottled water, carefully stacked binders. But the questions weren't neutral. Why were you in possession of server logs you had no authorization to view? How did you obtain internal documents after your termination? Are you aware your actions could constitute violation of confidentiality clauses? Each question twisted my work into something dirty, like I was the criminal. The very evidence proving Victor's midnight approval was being reframed as tainted, inadmissible, dangerous. The lawyer at Lena's side slid a folder toward me. "We advise you to sign this NDA. In exchange for your cooperation, the company will refrain from pursuing further action." I opened it. Pages of silencing clauses, threats wrapped in legalese. Break this, and you're liable for damages. Break this, and we'll bury you in court costs. It wasn't protection. It was a gag order dressed as mercy. I didn't sign. I closed the folder, pushed it back across the table, and let the silence sit. That's when they changed tactics. Gail from property management called the next day, her voice unsteady. "Maya, I need to step back." Legal reached out. "They don't want me corresponding with you." The red folder she'd filed was now off limits. Another lock, another lever stripped away. By the end of the week, I was isolated. Rena gone. Gail silenced. The hotline poisoned. The board compromised. Even the auditors were being fed curated documents, filtered by Victor's people before they reached outside eyes. The very system I'd weaponized was being turned against me, one clause at a time. And it worked. I felt the cage tightening. My carefully built scaffolding was shaking, timetables slipping. If the auditors only saw what Victor allowed, the trail would vanish. The money would stay gone. And I would look like a disgruntled former employee waving conspiracy theories. For the first time, I saw the possibility that this would end with nothing. No justice. No exposure. Just silence. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the succulent, its stubborn leaves still alive despite weeks of neglect. I poured a glass of wine I couldn't taste and laid out my notes again. Half the arrows now pointed to dead ends. Half the sticky notes meant nothing. I'd thought policy was stronger than personality. I'd thought compliance was immune to friendship, dinner tables, favors. I was wrong. Victor hadn't just cut me off. He had built a trap that looked exactly like due process. And if I stepped wrong, I wouldn't just lose my case, I'd lose my future. But I wasn't ready to quit. Not yet. Because buried in the mess, there had to be one path left. One opening they hadn't seen. And I was going to find it. When every door slams shut, you start looking at the walls. That's how I found the elevator. I was back near Mariner Tower late one night, parked across the street with the engine off. The building glowed in patches, executive floor lit like a stage, lower levels mostly dark. Delivery vans came and went from the service dock, their drivers wheeling out boxes of copy paper and wheeling in boxes no one ever labeled. That's when I remembered, the freight elevator. Most people thought of it as just another service shaft. But I knew better. The elevator logged every movement, wait, time, keycard access. Compliance required reports for insurance audits. No one read them except the landlord's assistant, and she filed them without a glance. But those logs existed. Always. The next day I requested them, not through Mariner, but through the property office, framed as a lease compliance review. Gail couldn't talk to me anymore, but the portal didn't care. 2 clicks later, I had 3 months of elevator data sitting in my inbox. I scrolled line by line until my eyes blurred. Then I saw it, 2:11 a.m. Friday. A load triggered the sensor, 200 pounds, just enough to be a box of files or a crate of equipment. Badge swipe, executive level clearance. Destination, executive suite. My pulse kicked. That timestamp matched the W-9 signature, the HVAC override, the failed badge swipe I'd already logged. Someone had physically moved something through the freight elevator at the exact moment the ghost vendor was pushed live. Cross-checking, I dug into the printer logs I'd salvaged before losing access. There it was, vendor packet printed at 2:14 a.m. The same window, the same pattern. Whoever moved those boxes upstairs had gone straight to the printer to generate paperwork that shouldn't exist. I didn't need the details of what was inside the boxes. The weight and the timing told the story. Victor hadn't just approved the transfer, he'd orchestrated a midnight run to cover it. I packaged the evidence carefully, elevator log entries, printer metadata, HVAC timestamps, all aligned in a neat grid. 4 points on a clock, all circling the same center. But this time, I didn't send it to the board, or HR, or anyone in Victor's orbit. I was done letting him control the narrative. I encrypted the packet and stashed copies on 2 drives, one hidden under my couch, the other mailed to a friend out of state with instructions not to open unless I told her. Insurance, in case I disappeared from the map. Standing in my apartment, I looked at the walls covered in sticky notes. Half my old levers were dead, but this was different. Logs generated by the building itself, independent of Mariner's systems. Victor couldn't touch them without admitting tampering with a landlord's audit trail. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground shift back under my feet. The building had given me a new opening. Not through policy. Through physics. A freight elevator doesn't lie. And neither would I. When the maze kept shifting, I stopped chasing doors and went for the load-bearing walls. No more requests to anyone on Mariner's payroll. I chose channels no one in the executive suite could edit. First, a notary. I swore to a clean affidavit tying 4 clocks together, the freight elevator's weight spike, the after-hours air override, the failed badge swipe, and the midnight approval. No adjectives, just time, date, and sequence. The stamp landed like a gavel. Second, the landlord's compliance portal. I uploaded the elevator entries under life safety/after-hours activity, attached the lease clause about accurate reporting, and linked the earlier insurance default notice. Buildings don't care about politics, they care about risk. Within a day, the property office issued a formal request for an internal review of executive floor access. Third, the bank. Through its secure channel, I submitted a neutral memorandum, vendor age, onboarding gaps, and timing anomalies, signed and notarized. Banks don't debate drama, they escalate anomalies. That memo didn't accuse anyone. It obligated them. Finally, the state's financial crimes e-file system. I lodged a concise complaint with the attachments already sworn and checksummed, then paid the fee and watched the confirmation number appear. Bureaucracy is slow until you feed it the one thing it never refuses, paper in the right order. The reaction was immediate and quiet, the way power moves when it realizes it's being observed. The landlord informed Mariner that access restrictions could follow if discrepancies weren't resolved. The bank asked for supporting documentation from the company and, without announcing it, put a hold on the vendor account, the kind of hold that checks whether a consultancy is a funnel. The outside auditors, suddenly receiving documents directly from the landlord and the bank instead of Victor's gatekeepers, called an emergency session with the board. This time I wasn't invited to speak. I didn't need to be. Paper was speaking for me. 2 days later, word leaked through the only grapevine that matters, facilities. Victor was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of a review. Elaine announced she was transitioning. Discretionary payments stayed frozen. A week after that, the bank flagged a return, a coherent slice of the $11. 8M traced and pulled back before it vanished entirely. Not all of it, ghosts are expensive, but enough to prove the point in a courtroom voice. They asked me to meet in the same kind of glass room where I'd once watched my job end. Different faces this time, different energy. Neutral, careful, alert. We appreciate your cooperation, counsel said. The board would like to resolve your claims. The offer was tidy, enhanced severance, benefits tail, a statement acknowledging my good faith reports, a reference letter that didn't sound like code for trouble. Rena's suspension was reversed, she handed in her resignation anyway, left with her head high. Gail sent me a single line by couriered card, lease cured. Logs retained. I signed my own papers with a steady hand. Not triumph, closure. Back at my apartment, the succulent sat squat and stubborn at the center of my once battlefield table. I threw open the window, let the city air in, and finally slept without counting timestamps. Here's the mic drop, they didn't lose because I broke the rules. They lost because I read them. And here's the lesson I earned the hard way, power hides in routines, but truth lives in the infrastructure, leases, logs, timestamps, temperature reports. Boring doesn't mean weak. Boring is incorruptible. Now it's your turn. What quiet, overlooked lever in your world could move the whole building if you pulled it? Every story lives as long as it is remembered. A like is your mark on this story, and a subscription is your ticket to the next one.